For years, officers Briggs and Reynolds harassed, humiliated, and brutalized without consequence, knowing that they were untouchable. Then, one day, they stopped two black twins, Malcolm and Isaiah Carter. The brothers were unarmed. The officers didn't care. When one twin pushed back, refusing to be treated like a criminal, they escalated. Words became threats, and threats became force. And then, when Malcolm moved, they shot him dead. His brother was left beaten, handcuffed, forced to watch his twin bleed out on the pavement. Now, Isaiah Carter, a Delta Force operative with a debt to settle, is coming for them. They thought their version of events would be the only one that mattered. They thought their power made them untouchable. They thought the system would erase their sins, just like it always had. But this time, the system won't save them, because Isaiah Carter is coming, and nothing will stop him from getting his vengeance. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The hum of the engine purred beneath them as the smooth black Dodge Charger coasted through the quiet streets, its polished frame reflecting the golden glow of the streetlights that lined the pristine sidewalks. Inside, Malcolm Carter sat behind the wheel, fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel, his sharp gaze flicking between the road and his twin brother in the passenger seat. Isaiah, more relaxed but always observant, sat with his arm resting against the window, watching the well-manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges roll past in uniform perfection. You ever notice how these neighborhoods all look the same? Malcolm mused, shaking his head slightly. Every house damn near identical. Like someone copy-pasted the whole block. Isaiah smirked. Ava liked that when she bought the place. Said it felt safe. Safe, Malcolm scoffed, rolling his eyes. I bet it feels real safe when you actually live here. But for us? You think they see two black men in a Charger at this hour and think, oh, they must be visiting family? Isaiah let out a quiet breath, knowing exactly where this was going. Malcolm, don't start. I'm just saying, man, Malcolm continued, his fingers tightening around the wheel. We're driving through one of the richest neighborhoods in the city, and you know damn well we're going to get side-eyed for it. Isaiah sighed, rubbing his temple. We're not doing this tonight. It's been a long month. I want to see Ava, have dinner, and not think about any of this. Malcolm exhaled sharply, his jaw still tight. But he didn't push it further. He just let the silence settle between them as the houses passed by in perfect symmetry, each one illuminated just enough to highlight their exclusivity. Then, just as he was about to switch the subject, Isaiah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his posture subtly shifting. Cop car, he muttered. Malcolm didn't react at first, just kept driving. But his grip on the wheel hardened slightly. Where? Just past us on the other side of the street. Marked unit. Neither of them turned their heads to look. But they could feel it, the weight of being noticed. The unspoken calculation happening behind them. The cruiser rolled past, slowing just slightly as it went by, just enough for its occupants to get a good look at them. Then came the moment neither of them needed to see to understand. The U-turn. Malcolm let out a low chuckle, humorless, eyes never leaving the road ahead. Well, look at that. Right on schedule. Isaiah exhaled slowly, his voice steady but firm. Mal, just keep driving normal. Yeah, Malcolm muttered. Like that matters. The blue and red lights flared to life behind them, the unmistakable wail of the siren cutting through the stillness of the night, commanding them to stop. Malcolm flicked on his turn signal, because God forbid they give them a reason to claim they weren't cooperating, and eased the Charger to a stop at the curb. The world outside was still, eerily silent apart from the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of a lawn sprinkler. All right, Isaiah murmured, shifting in his seat to face his brother. Let me do the talking. Malcolm's jaw twitched. Yeah? And what's that going to change? It's not about changing anything, Isaiah said, his voice calm but firm. It's about getting to Ava's in one piece. Malcolm didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, his nostrils flaring slightly. Then, slowly, he placed his hands on the wheel, fingers spread wide, making sure they were visible. Isaiah did the same, placing his hands on the dashboard, movements deliberate, controlled. They had both been here before. They knew the script. Footsteps crunched against the pavement as two figures approached the vehicle. A flashlight beam swept across the interior, pausing for just a second longer than necessary on their faces. Then came the voice, gruff, authoritative, laced with the unspoken certainty that this wasn't just a routine stop. License and registration. Malcolm didn't move, his expression blank, but Isaiah was already reaching for the glove compartment, his movements slow, exaggerated for the sake of appearances. "It's in here," he said evenly, looking up at the officer, making sure his tone was neutral, measured. No sudden movements. No agitation. The rules they had been forced to learn. The second officer hovered near Malcolm's window, his gaze sharp, scrutinizing. "Where are you two headed tonight?" Isaiah kept his focus on the first officer, handing over the documents without breaking eye contact. "We're on our way to our sister's house. She lives a few blocks up." The first officer took the documents without acknowledging the answer, glancing at the IDs before shifting his stance slightly. The second officer, Briggs, stepped closer to Malcolm's window, eyes narrowing slightly. "Step out of the car." Malcolm let out a slow breath through his nose, his fingers tightening on the wheel for just a fraction of a second. "Why?" Briggs's expression didn't change. "Because I said so." A muscle in Malcolm's jaw twitched, but Isaiah spoke before he could. "Officer, can we ask why we're being stopped?" The first officer, Reynolds, spoke this time. "There have been reports of break-ins in the neighborhood. You match the description." Malcolm let out a sharp, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Oh yeah? What's that description? Black and breathing?" Isaiah's pulse quickened. "Mal!" Briggs's voice hardened. "I said step out of the car." Isaiah turned back to Reynolds, his voice still steady. "Look, we're both military officers, Delta forces. Our IDs are right there. We're just trying to visit our sister. We're not looking for trouble." Briggs scoffed. "That right? Then you shouldn't have a problem stepping out." The tension inside the vehicle had thickened to the point of suffocation, every second stretching longer, the air growing heavier. Malcolm exhaled sharply through his nose, eyes locked on Briggs, every fiber of his being screaming at him to push back. But Isaiah was still looking at him, the weight of unspoken understanding in his gaze. Malcolm clenched his jaw, then finally, slowly, reached for the door handle. The moment it clicked open, Briggs's hand went to his holster. The night was about to turn deadly. The door eased open, the soft click of the latch barely audible over the weight of unspoken tension hanging between them. Malcolm stepped out first, slow, measured, his every movement deliberate as he rose to his full height, standing just a few inches taller than the officer before him. His hands remained visible, fingers spread slightly at his sides, a silent acknowledgement of the invisible rules men like him were forced to follow. Isaiah followed, mirroring his brother's controlled movements as he stepped around the front of the car, placing himself just slightly ahead, his stance protective without being confrontational. The night air felt colder now, or maybe that was just the edge of something far more dangerous creeping in, pressing against his skin like a storm waiting to break. The officers remained rigid, their hands resting a little too comfortably near their belts, watching the twins with the kind of studied intensity that spoke less of protocol and more of personal suspicion. "Turn around, hands on the car," Briggs ordered, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Malcolm didn't move, his jaw tightened, nostrils flaring as his fingers curled slightly. For what? His voice was sharp, but not raised, not yet, because he knew better. But the weight of it was there, simmering beneath the surface. Briggs arched a brow, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but carried the same quiet arrogance. "Because I said so." Isaiah, already anticipating where this was going, lifted a hand slightly, not in surrender, but in a silent request for calm. "Look, officer," he started, his voice controlled, steady, the practiced tone of a man who had been here before and knew exactly how little room for error there was. "We're both Delta Force. We understand protocol. If this is a routine stop, we've given you our IDs. You can check them, see we're exactly who we say we are, We don't want any trouble. We're just trying to see our sister." Briggs gave a slow nod, eyes narrowing slightly before he reached for the IDs Isaiah had handed over earlier. He flicked on his flashlight, letting the artificial glow skim over the laminated cards as Reynolds stepped in beside him, peering over his shoulder. The two men exchanged a look, barely noticeable, but Isaiah caught it. "Out of town," Briggs muttered, his voice carrying a tone of immediate skepticism. "Neither of you live here." Malcolm let out a low, humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "That's what we told you. We're visiting our sister." Briggs ignored him, flipping the ID over before glancing up again. "So, let me get this straight. You expect me to believe that two guys with an address across the city just happen to be driving through this neighborhood, in this car, at this hour, because your sister lives here?" Isaiah exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to keep his voice even. "Yes, that's exactly what we're telling you, because it's the truth." Reynolds, who had remained quiet up until now, shifted slightly, the light from Briggs's flashlight casting deep shadows across his face as he spoke for the first time. "Yeah? And what does your sister do to afford a place around here?" Isaiah stiffened, his eyes locking onto Reynolds's in that split-second exchange where the weight of the question was fully understood. It wasn't phrased outright, but the implication was clear. A black woman living in this kind of neighborhood? The suggestion hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Malcolm's lips parted, his patience fracturing audibly in the sharp breath he sucked in. "Excuse me?" Reynolds held his gaze unflinching, as if daring him to press it further. "Just saying, not a lot of people from your side of town end up in places like this without a good reason." Isaiah stepped forward before Malcolm could react, his body positioned just enough to physically interrupt whatever was about to happen. "She's a lawyer," he said, his voice sharper now, clipped in a way it hadn't been before. "Graduated top of her class. Works for one of the biggest firms in the city. That a good enough reason for you?" Briggs let out a slow exhale, tilting his head slightly as he studied them both, as if weighing their words, their worth. Then, without another comment, he turned, walking back toward his squad car. Isaiah let out a quiet breath, thinking for just a moment that maybe, just maybe, this was about to de-escalate. But then Briggs stopped, turning slightly over his shoulder. "Stay where you are," he muttered, disappearing inside his vehicle. Isaiah could hear the faint sound of radio static crackling from inside the car, a murmur of indistinct voices exchanging information, a background check. They were running them through the system. "They're stalling," Malcolm muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Running our names like we're goddamn criminals." Isaiah didn't respond immediately, just kept his eyes on the officers, his hands loose at his sides but ready. They were pushing, looking for a reason, an excuse, something to justify whatever was already forming in their minds. "Let's just keep cool," Isaiah murmured, though even he could feel the control slipping, the space for logic closing in. Malcolm turned slightly toward him, voice low, edged. "You think that's gonna change a damn thing?" Before Isaiah could answer, Briggs returned, his face unreadable, but his presence carrying something heavier now, something more resolute. He stepped back toward them, the flashlight still in his grip, and gestured. "All right," he said. "Hands on the car. Both of you." Isaiah took a slow breath, bracing himself. "Come on, man. We gave you everything you asked for. You know exactly who we are, where we're going. What are you still looking for?" Briggs didn't waver. "Step to the car." Malcolm didn't move. Briggs's hand went to his holster. Isaiah saw it happen in slow motion. The shift in posture, the way the air seemed to thicken, the silent understanding of what came next, if they didn't comply. His own breath caught for just a second, but then, with a slow, reluctant motion, he turned, placing his hands against the cool metal of the Charger's hood. Malcolm hesitated a second longer before finally, begrudgingly, following suit. The moment his hands touched the car, Briggs grabbed his wrist. Isaiah saw the first real flash of emotion break across Malcolm's face. A sharp flicker of something primal, something furious, and that was all it took. The spark had been lit. The night was about to ignite. The cold metal of the charger's hood pressed against Malcolm's palms, the rough texture biting into his skin as Briggs's hands moved with unnecessary force over his back, pressing hard against his ribs before sliding lower. The pressure wasn't just about the search. It was meant to provoke, to remind him who was in control. The weight of the moment settled over him, thick and suffocating, the air sharp with the unspoken tension of a game that had already been rigged against them before it even began. "Spread your legs wider," Briggs muttered, his tone clipped, edged with an arrogance that sent a hot pulse of anger straight through Malcolm's chest. Malcolm exhaled sharply, adjusting his stance, but only barely, just enough to avoid giving them anything they could twist into non-compliance. His fingers curled slightly over the hood. "Man, come on," he muttered, his voice low, brimming with frustration. "Ain't like I got a damn arsenal on me." Briggs didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge him, just continued the search, his hands pressing rougher now, shoving at Malcolm's pockets, his grip tightening like he was waiting for resistance. "You got a problem?" Briggs asked, his breath close now, deliberate, as his fingers dug into Malcolm's arm. Malcolm shifted slightly, his muscles tensing beneath the touch. "Yeah, I got a problem. My problem is some punk throwing me up against my own damn car like I just knocked over a damn convenience store." Briggs's grip tightened. Isaiah, still pressed against the charger beside him, felt the shift in the air before the words even fully registered. This was it, the moment the officers had been waiting for. "Mal," Isaiah warned, his voice tense but controlled, his eyes darting toward his brother with an urgency that was more than just a plea. It was survival. Briggs let out a slow, amused breath. "Listen to your brother, boy," he muttered, the last words sliding out of his mouth like venom, slow and deliberate, meant to cut deep. The night snapped. Malcolm jerked, twisting slightly, his head snapping toward Briggs, his breath sharp, his entire body coiled like a loaded spring. Isaiah moved instantly, pressing forward, shoulder against Malcolm's, physically blocking him before the last thread of restraint could break. "Malcolm, stop." Isaiah's voice was steady, but laced with urgency, his hands raised slightly in a placating motion. "Not here, not now." But Malcolm's breath was already coming too hard, too fast, his nostrils flaring, his fingers flexing at his sides. His instincts were screaming at him, demanding that he fight back, that he refused to let them turn him into a victim. Briggs tilted his head, smirking just enough to let them know he'd already won. "That's what I thought," he murmured. Then, slow and deliberate, he reached for his belt. Isaiah's pulse spiked. "All right," Briggs said, pulling out his handcuffs, letting the metal glint under the streetlight. "We're detaining you both while we confirm your story." Isaiah stepped forward. "Detained for what?" Briggs shrugged. "Resisting a lawful search. Possible obstruction. Hell, maybe even suspicion of intent. We got plenty of reasons." "That's a lie," Malcolm snapped, jerking away the moment Briggs reached for him. And that was all they needed. Briggs's grip latched onto Malcolm's arm, yanking him toward the car with unnecessary force, his shoulder wrenching forward at an awkward angle. Malcolm instinctively twisted, trying to regain his balance, and in that split second, Reynolds stepped in, gripping his other arm and pushing against his back, trying to force him down. Isaiah reached for Malcolm's shoulder, trying to stabilize him. "Just go with it, man. Just let them—" "Let go of me!" Malcolm barked, his voice cracking with the raw frustration of a man who had been through this before, who had been humiliated enough times to know where it led. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't attacking. He was reacting, but that didn't matter to them. Briggs shoved hard. Malcolm staggered. "He's resisting!" Briggs shouted, his voice already changing, twisting reality into a lie. Reynolds pulled back, his hand moving quickly to his belt. "He's got a weapon!" Isaiah saw it happen before it even did. The words were still in the air when Briggs reached for his gun, his movements rehearsed, practiced, like he'd been waiting for the moment to make the call. Malcolm twisted one last time, breath sharp, teeth bared, and then the gunshot cracked the air open. Malcolm jerked violently, his entire body snapping backward, his chest arching before his knees gave out beneath him. His breath hitched, a sound halfway between shock and disbelief, before he crumpled onto the pavement. Isaiah's scream tore through the night. "Malcolm!" He moved without thinking, lunging toward his brother. But before he could reach him, a white-hot explosion of pain surged through his chest. The taser hit him full force, electricity ripping through his body, locking his muscles into place, stealing the breath from his lungs. His legs gave out, his vision swimming as he hit the ground. "Officer down! He tried to grab my gun!" Briggs was screaming now, his voice frantic, but Isaiah could hear the lie in it, the premeditation, the way it was already being molded into the version they would tell. "Backup needed," Reynolds echoed, his voice high, breathless, his hand still gripping the smoking gun. Isaiah fought against the paralysis gripping his limbs, his vision hazy, his ears still ringing as he tried to push himself up, his body rebelling against him. His eyes found Malcolm. His brother lay sprawled just feet away, his chest barely rising, his fingers twitching weakly, his mouth parting slightly as if he was trying to say something. Isaiah dragged himself forward, his body screaming against the movement. "Malcolm, hold on, man." Malcolm coughed, a wet, ragged sound, his fingers weakly grasping at the air before finding Isaiah's arm, gripping with what little strength he had left. His lips trembled as his breath hitched, his eyes searching Isaiah's with something heavy, something Isaiah didn't want to understand. "Isaiah," Malcolm's voice barely came, choked, strained, each word a fight. His fingers dug weakly into Isaiah's sleeve. "I'm sorry." Isaiah's breath shattered. "No, no, no, don't. Hold on. Just—" His voice broke, his hand pressing over Malcolm's wound as if he could force time to reverse, to undo what had already been set in motion. Isaiah's hands trembled as he pressed down on the warmth spreading across his brother's chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard it felt like his entire body might shatter beneath the weight of what was happening. Malcolm's body twitched weakly beneath him, his fingers barely moving, the warmth of life slipping away faster than Isaiah could hold it together. "Malcolm, stay with me, man," Isaiah begged, his voice cracking under the force of his own panic, the words coming too fast, too desperate. "Come on, man. You're good. You're good. You hear me? Just breathe. Just—" His voice broke as Malcolm's eyes fluttered, barely open, his lips parting. But no real sound came out. "Malcolm, please," Isaiah choked, his hands pressing harder against the wound, as if he could force his brother's life to stay inside his body, as if sheer desperation alone could undo the horror spilling out between his fingers. "Look at me, man. Just look at me. You ain't going nowhere. You hear me? You're not." Malcolm let out a weak, wheezing breath, his fingers twitching against Isaiah's sleeve, grasping, barely holding on. His lips moved, voice nothing more than a whisper, broken and trembling. "Don't let them," Malcolm coughed, his body seizing up under the pain, his fingers tightening with what little strength he had left. "Don't let them get away with this." Isaiah's breath hitched, his vision swimming with hot, stinging tears as he grasped onto his brother's hands, squeezing them, refusing to let go. "No, no, no, don't say that. You hear me? You're not dying, man. You're not. You can't." Then came the voices. "Get off him!" Hands wrenched at the back of Isaiah's jacket, tearing him away with a violent yank that sent him sprawling backward, his knees scraping against the pavement as he fought against them, his arms clawing forward, trying to hold on to Malcolm. "No, no, please." A sharp blow slammed into his ribs, white-hot pain exploding through his side as his breath punched out of his lungs. The impact sent him curling inward, instinctively shielding himself before another hit crashed into his side. Then another, each one a brutal punctuation to his screaming grief. "Stop resisting!" Isaiah gasped as he was forced onto his stomach, the rough asphalt scraping against his face as weight crushed down on his back. A knee digging into his spine so hard it made his ribs groan in protest. His wrists were yanked behind him, his arms twisted at an unnatural angle, metal clamping down against his skin with sharp, biting force. "You think you can attack us?" A hand fisted into his hair, yanking his head back so he was forced to look up, forced to stare into Briggs's face, his teeth bared, his eyes gleaming with unchecked fury. "You killed my brother!" Isaiah screamed, his voice raw, shattered, the words barely making it past the sheer force of his rage and agony. "You shot him! He didn't do anything!" Briggs scoffed, shoving Isaiah's head back down like he was nothing. "Yeah? That what you think? 'Cause what I saw was a dangerous suspect resisting arrest." Isaiah's chest heaved, his body trembling beneath the weight pressing him into the pavement. He was unarmed. "You murdered him." His voice cracked, his throat burning, each word dragged from the deepest part of him, the part that had just lost the only person who had ever understood him completely. "You killed him in the street like a damn animal, and now you're gonna act like we deserved this?" Briggs twisted his grip harder, pressing his knee down with more force until Isaiah let out a strangled cry. "You know how this works, right? Who do you think they're gonna believe?" Isaiah sucked in a shaky breath, his entire body going stiff as a hollow, gut-wrenching realization settled over him. This was always how it ended. Briggs stood, dusting off his uniform, like this was just another day, another routine, nothing more than an inconvenience. "We'll take it from here," he called out to the other officers arriving, his voice steady, confident, dripping with the certainty of a man who knew he would never face consequences. Reynolds hovered beside him, shifting slightly, his hands shaking as he holstered his weapon. His eyes flickered toward Isaiah, something hesitant in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stepped back, nodded. "He reached for a weapon," Briggs said smoothly, his voice carrying across the street, as if the lie had already been accepted as truth. "We had no choice." Isaiah's stomach twisted, bile rising in his throat. The words had already changed. The story was already being rewritten. His breath stuttered, a fresh wave of nausea rolling through him as he turned his head just enough to see Malcolm's body still lying motionless on the pavement, his blood pooling beneath him, dark and thick, seeping into the cracks of the concrete. His brother, his twin, his other half, gone. And they were going to erase him. "Hey!" A new voice cut through the chaos, sharp and demanding. "What is going on here?" Isaiah barely processed it before he was yanked up by his cuffs, his body hauled forward like dead weight. His vision swam, dizziness crashing over him, the world tilting violently as he was dragged toward the back of a squad car. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer," someone muttered, but the words barely registered. White noise against the static roaring in his head. The door wrenched open, and then he was shoved inside, his body slamming against the hard plastic seat with enough force to make his ribs scream in protest. Through the smeared glass, Malcolm was still lying there. Still alone. Still bleeding out in the street, while the men who murdered him stood over him, deciding what version of the truth they would tell the world. Isaiah's fingers curled into fists behind his back, nails digging so hard into his palms that he thought they might break skin. Briggs walked past the window, his expression calm, composed, already moving on, like he had just checked another box on his to-do list. The last thing Isaiah saw before the door slammed shut was Malcolm's lifeless body, left behind on the pavement, like he had never mattered at all. The world blurred. Isaiah sat slumped against the cold plastic seat of the squad car, his wrists still bound behind him, the metal digging deep into his skin, but the pain barely registered. His breath came in short, hollow gasps, his chest rising and falling in uneven bursts as the blood rushing through his veins drowned out everything else. He could still feel the weight of Malcolm in his arms, could still hear the tremor in his brother's breath, the way his voice had cracked, those last words slipping out, barely above a whisper. "Don't let them get away with this." His throat tightened, his teeth clenching so hard that his jaw ached. But it didn't matter. None of it did, because Malcolm was gone, and he hadn't been able to stop it. The night passed in fragments, red and blue lights flashing against the pavement, indistinct voices shouting orders, the cold press of cuffs, the rough hands shoving him forward, the scent of sweat, asphalt, and blood clinging to the air. At some point, the car had started moving, the weight of the moment shifting as the squad car rolled away, taking him with it, dragging him away from Malcolm, away from the only piece of family that had ever felt like home. He didn't know how long they drove. The streets blurred together, indistinct shapes and neon signs streaking past the window, like something out of a dream. But none of it felt real. Nothing felt real. His fingers twitched uselessly behind him, his nails digging into his palms, his muscles locked so tight his entire body felt like it might snap under the pressure. His mind kept looping back, kept dragging him back to the last time he and Malcolm had been in a car together, just hours earlier, laughing about identical houses in a neighborhood that wasn't made for them. Ava liked that when she bought the place, said it felt safe, safe. A choked, bitter sound pressed against the back of his throat, but it never made it past his lips. The weight of grief was too thick, too heavy, coiling around his ribs like a steel vice. His head tipped back against the seat, his gaze unfocused, his thoughts slipping into the past like water through trembling fingers. He and Malcolm had always been together, always, from the moment they were born, side by side, their mother holding them close, whispering their names like they were meant to be spoken in the same breath. Malcolm and Isaiah, Isaiah and Malcolm. They had fought together, laughed together, bled together. They had survived. As kids, they had learned young what it meant to be feared before they were even old enough to understand why. They had learned to keep their hands visible in convenience stores, to stay still when a cop car rolled by, to smile just enough to seem unthreatening but not so much that it looked forced. They had learned to control their anger, to bury it deep, to push it down so far that it couldn't be used against them. But Malcolm had never been able to push it far enough. Isaiah had always been the one to step in, the one to keep him grounded, the one to pull him back when the world tried to push him too far. But this time, this one time, he hadn't been fast enough. He hadn't been strong enough. He hadn't saved him. He squeezed his eyes shut, his head pounding, his hands curling into fists behind him. It should have been him. If he had just stepped in sooner, if he had just kept Malcolm from speaking, from moving, from breathing too freely in a space that was never meant for them. The car slowed, turning sharply, and the sudden motion yanked him out of his thoughts. His eyes opened, his breath catching as the reality of the moment crashed back into him. The precinct loomed ahead, its fluorescent lights buzzing against the night, sterile and indifferent. The car rolled to a stop. A door opened, then hands were on him again, dragging him forward, forcing his body upright as his legs struggled to catch up with the movement. His feet stumbled against the pavement as they hauled him out of the car, the shift in motion sending another wave of dizziness crashing over him. His ribs throbbed, his skull still aching from where he had been slammed into the ground. But the officers didn't slow, didn't care. The inside of the station was just as harsh, all white tile and dull overhead lights, the scent of sweat and coffee thick in the air. He was shoved forward, past rows of desks, past officers who barely even looked up as he was dragged through the booking process, barely more than a body, barely even a person. They took his fingerprints, his mugshot. They took everything. And through it all, he said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, but because none of it mattered. Malcolm was dead. They had won. Time passed in a haze. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there, his body slumped in a hard plastic chair, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him. His head hung low, his breathing shallow, his thoughts tangled in something too thick, too dark to pull himself out of. The door creaked open. Isaiah barely reacted, his body too heavy, too exhausted, the weight of his grief sinking so deep he wasn't sure he could ever climb out of it. Then, Isaiah! The voice snapped through him like a jolt of electricity. His head lifted. Ava stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her chest heaving, her entire body radiating something sharp, something barely contained. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward, as she took in the bruises blooming along his jaw, the dried blood crusting at the corner of his mouth, the way his wrists were still bound to the table like he was the criminal. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her breath hitched, and her face twisted into something Isaiah had never seen before. Something shattered, and Isaiah realized she already knew. The weight of it crushed him all over again. Ava stood in the doorway, her breath shallow, her fingers curled into fists at her sides as she took in the sight of her brother. His head bowed, his wrists shackled to the table, his entire body slumped with the weight of something she couldn't begin to put into words. Isaiah barely moved. He sat there, still as stone, his chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. His face was bruised, dark splotches blooming along his jaw and beneath his right eye. His knuckles raw, dried blood still crusted at the corner of his mouth. His clothes were stained, dirt, sweat, and something darker smudging the fabric. But none of that was what made Ava's stomach twist into knots. It was his eyes. They were empty. Ava swallowed hard, forcing down the burn in her throat as she stepped forward, the sharp click of her heels against the linoleum cutting through the heavy silence. She wasn't here to cry. She wasn't here to grieve. Not yet. Right now, Isaiah needed her. She pulled out the chair across from him, scraping it against the floor as she sat down. Isaiah. Her voice was steady, firm. It took him a second to react, his gaze slowly lifting to meet hers. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with exhaustion so deep it looked like it had settled into his bones. He blinked once, sluggish, as if pulling himself back into the present required effort. "They killed him," he murmured, his voice hoarse, raw from screaming. Ava inhaled sharply through her nose, her jaw tightening. She forced herself to push through it, to keep her composure, to shove aside the grief clawing at her insides long enough to get him out of this room. "I know," she said, the words barely above a whisper. "I know, Isaiah." He let out a slow, uneven breath, his fingers twitching against the cold metal of the cuffs. "They shot him in the street like a dog." His voice cracked slightly, but there was no real emotion behind it. Just emptiness, just fact. Ava reached forward, her fingers brushing lightly against his wrists, against the metal digging into his skin. "We're getting you out of here." A flicker of something crossed Isaiah's face. Not quite hope, but something close enough to it that Ava held onto it with everything she had. "They're charging me," he muttered. "Assaulting an officer. Resisting arrest. They're gonna say Malcolm attacked them. They're already saying it." Ava's stomach twisted. Of course they were. The lie was already forming, already being pushed forward in official statements and press briefings, already being shaped into something that painted the men with badges as heroes, and Malcolm as the aggressor. Isaiah's breath shuddered, his hands clenching into fists. "He didn't fight them, Ava. I swear to you, he didn't." "Isaiah." Ava reached forward again, her grip firm but careful. "I believe you. I believe you." Isaiah closed his eyes for a brief second, just enough to let the weight of her words settle over him before opening them again. "They're gonna get away with it, aren't they?" Ava's lips parted slightly, her throat tightening. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to tell him that the law worked, that there was a path forward, that Malcolm would get justice, but she wasn't about to lie to him. Instead, she took a breath, straightened her spine, and forced every ounce of confidence into her voice. Right now, I need to focus on getting you out of here. After that, we fight. But we don't get to do anything if you're still in a jail cell. Understand? Isaiah held her gaze for a long moment before giving a slow, reluctant nod. Good, Ava said, already shifting into action. She reached into her bag, pulling out a stack of documents, setting them on the table with sharp precision. I've already spoken to a judge. I filed for emergency bail consideration, but the police are pushing back. They're claiming you're a flight risk. Isaiah scoffed, shaking his head. A flight risk? You serious? They're stalling, Ava confirmed, her lips pressing into a thin line, buying themselves time while they craft their story. If they keep you in here long enough, they control the entire narrative. I can't let that happen. Isaiah exhaled sharply, his jaw clenching. So, what's the plan? Ava sat forward. I filed a motion for an immediate review of the charges, which means I can argue for your release in front of a judge first thing in the morning. But that's not enough. I need leverage. I need pressure. Isaiah frowned slightly, his brow furrowing. What kind of pressure? Ava glanced toward the two-way mirror, knowing full well that someone was listening, and lowered her voice just slightly. I called every journalist I know, every activist, every civil rights lawyer, everyone. By morning, the entire city is going to be watching this case. The more eyes on it, the harder it'll be for them to bury the truth. Isaiah stared at her, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. You really think that's gonna work? Ava leaned in. I think they want to make you disappear. But they can't if we make sure the entire damn country is looking at them. Isaiah swallowed, his throat tight. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But he had seen too many names turned into hashtags, too many bodies left in the street with no justice to follow. Ava could see the doubt, the exhaustion, the raw hopelessness clawing at him. She reached out again, this time grasping his hand, her grip firm, grounding. I'm getting you out of here, she repeated, her voice steady, unwavering. I swear to you, Isaiah, you are not going to rot in here while they turn Malcolm into some thug who deserved to die. Not while I'm still breathing. Isaiah exhaled, something deep in his chest shifting. The moment Isaiah stepped out of the station, the air hit him like a slap to the face. Cold, sharp, too open after the suffocating walls of the holding cell. He inhaled deep, filling his lungs, but it wasn't enough. The weight in his chest didn't lift. The shackles on his wrists were gone, but they had been replaced with something heavier, something that no court order or legal maneuver could undo. Ava was beside him, walking with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement, her posture straight and controlled. But Isaiah could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clenched the strap of her briefcase too tightly. She had won this battle. Barely. But she was already bracing for the war ahead. Outside the precinct, a wall of reporters and flashing cameras lined the barricades, microphones extended forward, voices shouting questions, news vans parked along the curb, their headlights illuminating the chaos. Ava had done exactly what she said she would. The city was watching. Isaiah, do you have anything to say about the charges against you? Isaiah. What happened that night? Do you believe the officers acted unlawfully? He didn't stop, didn't look at them. His jaw was locked, his fingers curling into fists at his sides, his pulse roaring in his ears. He couldn't be here. He couldn't breathe with all these people shoving microphones in his face, waiting for him to break, waiting for a quote, waiting to twist whatever words he said into something neat and palatable for the 6 o'clock news. Ava didn't stop either. She pressed forward, her grip firm on his arm as they moved toward the waiting car. The cameras flashed. The questions kept coming, but the moment the car door shut behind them, the world outside became nothing more than a distant hum. Isaiah stared ahead, his jaw tight, his body stiff. Ava exhaled beside him, her fingers pressed against her temple, her breath unsteady for just a moment before she composed herself again. You okay? She asked softly. He didn't answer. Because no, he wasn't okay. He had just been released from a cell after watching his brother die in the street. He had been beaten, cuffed, accused, and now the same system that let those officers pull the trigger was still holding him by the throat, still twisting the truth, still making sure that he was the criminal. No, he wasn't okay. But what did that even matter? Ava exhaled again, shifting in her seat. "We're going straight home," she said. "You need to rest. We'll talk about everything tomorrow." Isaiah just kept staring ahead. The first thing Isaiah noticed when they walked through the door was how normal everything looked. The living room was still warm with the scent of lavender and wood polish. The couch still had the same deep indent from where Malcolm always sat. Their mother's old quilt still draped over the back, like she had left it there herself. For a split second, Isaiah could almost pretend Malcolm was in the next room, almost pretend that if he just walked down the hall, he'd find him there, scrolling through his phone, smirking at some stupid joke, breathing. But then, the weight of reality crashed down again, and the silence in the house felt unbearable. Ava set her briefcase on the table, rolling her shoulders as she exhaled. "All right. First thing tomorrow, we start putting pressure on the DA's office. I already have a few people reaching out, but we need to push harder. They're going to try and stall, hoping this blows over. But it won't, not this time." Isaiah sat on the couch, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his fingers laced together as he stared at the floor. "And if they don't do anything?" His voice was quieter now, steadier, but still heavy with something unresolved. Ava hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Then we take it higher. We push for federal involvement. Civil rights violations, anything we can throw at them." Isaiah nodded slowly, but the emptiness in his eyes didn't change. And just like that, the days bled together. The calls were made. The paperwork was filed. The protests outside the police department grew larger. The city boiled with tension. And every single attempt at justice was met with the same response. "We're still reviewing the case. There isn't sufficient evidence at this time to proceed with charges." The officers were acting in the line of duty. Isaiah sat in silence as he listened to the news updates, as he watched Ava's frustration mount, as he watched every single person with the power to do something step back, fold their hands, and do nothing. Every door they knocked on led to another excuse, another delay, another carefully worded statement about ongoing investigations and due process. The system wasn't just broken. It was doing exactly what it was built to do. And Isaiah could feel something shifting inside him, a slow burn, a weight pressing against his ribs, pushing harder, making it impossible to breathe. Isaiah was sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at his untouched plate of food, the news droning in the background. Ava sat across from him, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gripping a pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That's not good enough," she snapped, her voice sharp, laced with an anger she was barely holding back. "They have body cam footage. Where is it? Why hasn't it been released?" Isaiah barely heard her. His eyes had drifted toward the TV, the headline scrolling across the screen. "Press conference. Police chief speaks on tragic incident involving Malcolm Carter." The screen cut to a podium. The police department's emblem displayed proudly behind the man standing in front of the microphones. "The loss of life is always unfortunate," the chief said, his voice steady, smooth, rehearsed. "Our officers were faced with a life-threatening situation, and they responded accordingly. The suspect was hostile, uncooperative, and attempted to reach for a weapon. They had no choice but to defend themselves." The camera panned slightly. Briggs and Reynolds stood to the side, their faces blank, their uniforms crisp. Then, Briggs stepped forward. "It's always difficult when situations escalate like this," he said, his voice just the right amount of solemn, just the right amount of regretful. "We never want to take a life, but when an officer feels threatened, we have to protect ourselves. I feared for my life." Isaiah's fingers curled into his palms. "I wish things had gone differently," Briggs continued. "But that man left us no choice." Something inside Isaiah snapped. The emptiness in his eyes burned away, replaced with something sharper, something hotter, something that made his entire body go rigid. Ava was still on the phone, her voice rising, but she must have seen it. The way his entire demeanor shifted, the way his hands trembled with something far more dangerous than grief. "Isaiah?" He didn't respond, because at that moment, the fire had consumed him completely, and he knew. If the system wasn't going to give him justice, then he was going to take it himself. He hadn't realized his nails had dug so deep into his palms that they'd drawn blood until Ava's voice cut through the air. Isaiah. It was cautious. A name spoken not in authority, not in reassurance, but in knowing. He didn't look at her, didn't move, didn't do anything but keep his gaze fixed on the television, as if burning holes into the screen would make the lies unravel. Ava set her phone down, exhaling sharply. "Isaiah, talk to me." His jaw twitched, his fingers flexing. "You heard it," he said, his voice lower than usual, rough, as if it had been scraped raw from the inside out. "You heard every damn word." Ava hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I did." Isaiah inhaled through his nose, forcing himself to keep the anger contained, but it was pushing against his ribs, slamming against his chest, burning hot enough that it felt like it might split him open from the inside. He turned toward her then, his movements controlled, but his eyes, they were different, no longer hollow, no longer grief-stricken. They burned. "And what do we do now?" His voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that existed only in the moments before a storm. Ava's lips parted slightly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table as she measured her words. "We keep fighting," she said, her voice firm, unwavering, the words carrying the weight of someone who had spent her entire life navigating the legal battlefield. Someone who had built an entire career out of pushing against an immovable system. "We go back at them harder. We apply more pressure. We make sure they don't get to control the narrative." Isaiah let out a sharp, bitter exhale, shaking his head. "The narrative," he muttered, the word tasting like acid in his mouth. "That's all it is to them, isn't it? A damn story. A version of events they get to shape, get to bend until it fits what they need it to be." Ava held his gaze, her breath steady, but Isaiah could see it, the flicker of unease beneath her composure. The way she was bracing herself. Isaiah leaned forward, placing his hands on the table, his knuckles white. "Malcolm is dead, Ava." His voice wavered for just a fraction of a second before it hardened again. "And they're gonna walk. You know it. I know it. Hell, they know it. Every time we apply pressure, every time we push harder, all we're doing is playing their game. But the system is already rigged, and we're the only ones still pretending like it's not." Ava swallowed, her fingers gripping tighter. "Isaiah, you told me to believe in the system." Isaiah pressed on, his voice rising, not with hysteria, but with something deeper, something raw and unfiltered. "You told me there was a way forward, that there was still a chance for justice. And I did. I sat here. I waited. I watched you fight for every angle, and all we've gotten is locked doors, empty statements, and those pigs standing up there on national television calling my brother a threat." Ava's face tightened, but she didn't speak. Isaiah exhaled sharply, shoving away from the table, pacing, his hands running over his head, frustration rolling off of him in waves. "Self-defense," he spat. "Fear for their lives." He let out a harsh, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "That's all it takes, huh? That's all it takes to justify murder." Ava pushed up from her seat now, standing, her voice stronger. "You think I don't know that?" she snapped, and for the first time, there was an edge of something unrestrained in her voice, something that slipped past the controlled mask she always wore. "You think I don't know exactly how this goes?" Isaiah turned toward her, his breath heaving, his chest rising and falling with something that had been brewing for too long. Ava's lips trembled slightly before she pressed them together, steeling herself. "You're right," she said, and it was so quiet at first that he almost didn't hear it. "Everything about this is rigged. Everything about this is designed to protect them. And I hate it, Isaiah. I hate it. But you have to let me keep fighting this the way I know how." Isaiah shook his head, his fists clenching at his sides. And how do you know it's gonna work? How do you know we're not just giving them more time to clean this up, to erase Malcolm completely? How do you know? Ava inhaled sharply, her throat bobbing. I don't, she admitted. And the honesty in it was enough to make Isaiah stop. I don't know. But if we go outside the system, if you do something you can't take back, then they win. They'll get exactly what they want. Isaiah stared at her for a long, suffocating moment, the silence between them thick with everything unsaid. Then he shook his head. They already won, he murmured. And Ava knew. She knew the moment his voice dropped like that, the moment the fire in his eyes settled into something colder, something unchangeable, something final. Her stomach turned. Isaiah! But he was already stepping back, already turning toward the door, already slipping away from her like a shadow breaking from its anchor. Isaiah, wait! Ava pushed forward, reaching for his arm, desperation creeping into her voice now. But he was already gone, already moving toward something she couldn't pull him back from. She watched the door shut behind him, watched the final sliver of light disappear as he walked into the night. And for the first time since this all started, Ava felt fear. The night wrapped around Isaiah like a second skin, the cool air brushing against his face as he moved through the city with a new kind of purpose. Each step measured, each thought sharper than the last. He had always been disciplined. Military training had drilled that into him. But this was different. This wasn't combat. This wasn't a mission sanctioned by the government. This was something far more personal. He had no plan at first. Not a solid one, anyway. Just the quiet, steady hum of rage pushing him forward. The certainty that he needed to see them. Briggs and Reynolds needed to look them in the eye again. Needed to watch them in a way they had never expected. The same way predators stalked prey before the kill. It didn't take long. Police officers weren't as untouchable as they thought. They had routines, patterns, lives outside of the job. And Isaiah was good at what he did. Better than they could ever know. The first thing he learned was that neither of them had a wife. No children. No families waiting for them at home. Briggs lived alone in a modest but well-kept house in a quiet part of the city. A neighborhood that was mostly white, mostly upper-middle class. The kind of place where people trusted the police because they had never had to fear them. He got home at the same time every night, parked his car in the driveway, and took exactly 5 steps up to his front door before disappearing inside. No porch lights, no security cameras. Reynolds was the same. A small apartment, clean, unremarkable. He spent most of his time alone, except for the nights when he drank himself into a stupor at a local bar a few blocks from the precinct. It wasn't enough. Isaiah needed to know them, needed to see past their uniforms, past the carefully curated personas they presented to the world. He wanted to understand what kind of men they really were. Not just the ones who had pulled the trigger that night, but the ones they had always been. So he dug deeper. And the more he found, the worse it got. The first thing that sent a fresh wave of fury rolling through him was the complaints. There were so many. Excessive force, racial profiling, suspicious stops. Isaiah spent hours combing through old reports, finding patterns that no one had cared enough to investigate. Too many black men stopped for no reason. Too many injuries sustained during routine arrests. Too many names attached to complaints that had mysteriously gone nowhere. Briggs had been in the department for years, long enough to build a reputation, long enough to know exactly how far he could push the line without consequences. He had been accused of brutality 7 times, but every single report had been reviewed and dismissed. The details made Isaiah's stomach churn. A young man, barely 19, beaten so badly during an arrest that he had suffered permanent nerve damage. An older black veteran, pulled over for a traffic violation, slammed against the pavement when he asked why he had been stopped. A father, arrested in front of his children for disturbing the peace. when he had simply been recording police activity outside his home. Each story was worse than the last. Each one a reminder that Malcolm's death had not been an accident, not an isolated incident. Briggs had been hunting men like Malcolm for years, and no one had stopped him. Reynolds wasn't much better. He had fewer complaints, fewer marks on his record, but that only made it worse, because Isaiah could see the pattern of silence, the way he had watched and done nothing, the way he had backed up Briggs's lies time and time again, the way he had let black men suffer under his partner's hands without ever stepping in. Isaiah found body cam footage from 3 years ago, a case where a young black teenager had been stopped while riding his bike through a predominantly white neighborhood. Briggs had done all the talking, his voice smooth, condescending, barely masking his hostility. The boy had been scared, his voice shaking as he answered their questions, his hands trembling as he reached for his ID. Then Briggs had slammed him against the squad car, accusing him of reaching for something else, of acting suspicious. Isaiah watched the footage, his breath locked in his chest. The boy hadn't fought, hadn't resisted. He had just stood there, too scared to move, too shocked to react, and Reynolds had done nothing. The video ended with Briggs shoving the kid onto the pavement, handcuffing him, his voice calm as he told him he was being detained for failure to comply. Isaiah shut his laptop. The anger had been a steady hum before. Now it was a roar, something hot and alive, something that made his fingers tremble with the effort it took to stay still. This wasn't about Malcolm anymore. This was about all of them. Every single name buried under police reports. Every single man who had been beaten, humiliated, locked in a cage, left in the street, erased like their existence had never mattered. This was about every single man who had been Briggs and Reynolds's prey and never got to fight back. Isaiah clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly, forcing the air through his lungs before it burned him from the inside out. He pressed his hands against the desk, grounding himself, steadying himself. He had all the information he needed. Now it was time to decide what to do with it. Tertus. He left the apartment in the dead of night, his hood pulled up, his steps silent against the pavement. Briggs's house was first. Isaiah stood across the street, watching from the shadows, his gaze locked on the dark windows, on the faint glow of a television flickering inside. He imagined Briggs sitting there, drinking a beer, flipping through channels without a second thought about the life he had stolen. Isaiah exhaled slowly. Reynolds's apartment was next. Same routine. Same watchful silence. The bar down the street was still open, half full of cops just getting off shift, laughing over cheap whiskey, letting the world fade into static because none of them had ever had to care. Isaiah turned away, his fists clenched. His path was clear now, and soon Briggs and Reynolds would finally know what it felt like to be hunted. The night wrapped around Isaiah like a cloak, the city stretching out before him in a dull haze of neon signs and distant sirens. He moved through the streets with purpose, his body loose, controlled, his steps silent against the pavement. The fire burning in his chest had cooled into something else now, something colder, something sharper. The anger was still there, raw, pulsing, alive, but it had settled beneath the surface, honed into focus. He wasn't just a grieving man anymore. He was a predator, and tonight, Reynolds was the prey. The bar was exactly what he expected. A dimly lit hole in the wall, tucked away on a quiet street just a few blocks from the precinct. The kind of place where cops gathered after their shifts to drink, to laugh, to blow off steam without worrying about the wrong eyes watching. It was barely half full when Isaiah arrived, just a scattering of officers nursing beers, engaged in low conversation, their backs turned to the world outside. And then there was Reynolds. He sat near the center of the room, his body slouched comfortably in the booth, a whiskey glass held loosely between his fingers. His uniform was gone, replaced by casual clothes, but he still carried himself the same way. Relaxed, confident, shoulders squared like a man who had never known real fear. Isaiah lingered in the shadows near the back, close enough to listen without being noticed. He could hear the low murmur of conversation, the occasional clink of ice against glass, but it wasn't until another officer leaned in, grinning, amused, that Isaiah's blood ran cold. "Man, the media's eating this case alive," the other cop said, shaking his head. "You and Briggs gonna be good?" Reynolds smirked, lifting his glass. "You know how it is. Standard protocol. Internal review. A couple weeks of paid leave, then we're right back to it." He took a sip, his expression completely unbothered, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Isaiah's fingers curled against the edge of the table beside him, his breath steady but deep. The other officer chuckled. "Gotta say, man, that was one hell of a shot. You sure that guy didn't have something on him?" Reynolds scoffed, shaking his head. "Please. If he did, we'd have found it, planted it, whatever it took. Doesn't matter, though. That kid sealed his own fate the second he got mouthy. I swear, they never learn." Isaiah's world tilted. The breath left his lungs in one sharp, violent exhale, his muscles going rigid, his nails digging into his palms. They were bragging, laughing, mocking Malcolm like he had been nothing, like he had been just another name, another statistic, another inconvenience erased without consequence. Reynolds leaned back, shaking his head, voice dripping with amusement. Briggs had to put on the whole shaken officer act for the cameras. But between you and me, we did the city a favor. Ain't nobody gonna miss that guy. Isaiah barely heard the response, barely felt anything other than the slow, controlled rage sinking its claws into his chest, burrowing deep, wrapping around his ribs and squeezing until he could barely breathe. His ears rang, his vision narrowed, and in that moment, he knew there was only one path forward. No courts, no appeals, no pressure on the system. He wasn't going to fight for justice anymore. He was going to make it himself. Isaiah stepped out of the bar, inhaling the crisp night air, letting it settle in his lungs, letting it cool the fire burning inside him just enough to keep his thoughts sharp. Reynolds and Briggs thought they were untouchable, thought the badge gave them power, gave them the right to decide who lived and who died. Isaiah was going to show them how wrong they were. He had been turning over the possibilities in his mind for days. What to do, how to do it, whether to make it slow or fast, whether to make it a message or a simple execution. He had studied them, memorized their routines, learned the patterns of their lives the way a sniper learned his target's weaknesses. But now, the decision had been made. They were going to die exactly like Malcolm did. The same fear, the same helplessness, the same powerlessness Malcolm had felt when they threw him against the car, when they slammed him to the ground, when they pulled the trigger and let his blood soak the pavement. Reynolds was going to feel it first. Isaiah exhaled, pulling his hoodie tighter around his face, his mind already constructing the next steps. He would need timing, isolation, the right location. It couldn't be rushed. It had to be perfect. Reynolds left the bar around the same time every night, usually alone. He walked to his car in the back lot, away from the main road, away from the streetlights. Too cocky to be cautious, too confident to even consider the idea that someone might be watching. Isaiah checked the time. He still had 15 minutes before Reynolds would stumble out, slightly buzzed, but still steady enough to drive. Perfect. He moved quickly, slipping around the side of the building, staying low, moving through the alley until he reached the parking lot. He found the spot, a shadowed corner near the back fence, just beyond the range of the security camera mounted near the entrance. And then he waited. The cold air did nothing to dull the steady pulse of anticipation thrumming beneath his skin. His muscles coiled with the kind of tension he had only felt before battle, the kind of singular focus that came just before the first shot was fired. His breath was slow, steady. He could already picture it. Reynolds stepping out, unaware, completely at ease, walking to his car with the same arrogance he had carried in that bar. Isaiah would let him unlock the door, let him relax, let him think for one final moment that his world was still exactly as he had left it. And then Isaiah would drag him to the ground, shove him against the pavement, press his face against the asphalt, just like they had done to Malcolm. And then he would let Reynolds understand, fully, completely, with no escape, no mercy, exactly what it had felt like to be Malcolm in those last, gasping seconds. Isaiah's fingers flexed. He heard the bar door open. It was time. Isaiah stayed still, his breath steady, his body coiled, his muscles tense but controlled, as he watched the door to the bar swing open. The dim yellow light spilled onto the pavement, stretching shadows out across the lot, casting long, dark lines that flickered and shifted as Reynolds stepped outside. He moved just like Isaiah had expected, comfortable, unhurried, oblivious. His posture was loose, his shoulders relaxed, the confidence of a man who had never known true danger, who had never had to look over his shoulder, who had never once considered that the violence he inflicted could ever find its way back to him. Isaiah clenched his jaw, watching, waiting, his fingers curling into fists as Reynolds dug into his pocket, pulling out his car keys and whistling softly to himself, swaying slightly from the alcohol still running warm through his bloodstream. He wasn't drunk, not enough to stumble, but enough to dull his senses, to make him sloppy. Reynolds reached his car, pressed the unlock button, and the chirp of the alarm cut through the night air. That was when Isaiah stepped forward. He moved slow, deliberately, his steps measured as he let his presence be known, the sound of his boots scraping against the pavement just enough to pull Reynolds's attention. The officer stiffened slightly, glancing over his shoulder, and for a split second, there was no recognition, no real concern, just mild irritation, as if Isaiah was some drunk who had wandered too close. Then his eyes sharpened. He knew. A slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. "Well, well," Reynolds muttered, turning fully now, pocketing his keys. "Didn't expect to see you out here, Carter." Isaiah said nothing. Reynolds tilted his head slightly, looking him up and down with the same condescension he had seen that night outside Ava's house. The same easy arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. "What?" he said, voice laced with amusement. "You come out here looking for some answers? Hoping I'll admit something for your little court case?" He let out a sharp chuckle, shaking his head. "Man, I gotta say, I respect the dedication, but I already told you. There's nothing to fight here." It was a clean shooting. Isaiah inhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to stay still, to hold back the fury curling inside his chest like a living thing. Reynolds scoffed, stepping closer, his smirk widening. "Come on, don't look at me like that. It's not personal. It's just the way the world works. You and your brother made a mistake, and you paid for it. I mean, Malcolm was always going to end up dead sooner or later, right? Might as well have been me that put him down." Isaiah moved, before he even made the conscious decision to. His fist slammed into Reynolds's mouth, the impact cracking through the night air, the force behind it sending the officer staggering back into his car. The arrogance vanished. Reynolds lifted his head, his lip split open, blood dripping down his chin, shock flickering across his face before it morphed into something uglier. Anger, disbelief, fear. "You crazy son of a—" Isaiah was on him again before he could finish. His second punch crashed into Reynolds's ribs, his knuckles slamming into flesh and bone, and the officer grunted, wheezing as he hunched over. Isaiah followed up, his elbow smashing into Reynolds's temple, the sharp impact sending him stumbling sideways, his hands scrambling for balance against the car. "You didn't think I was gonna do anything, did you?" Isaiah's voice was low, even, deadly. He took a step forward as Reynolds straightened, his breath coming hard now, his hands lifting instinctively. Not to fight, not yet, but to placate. "All right, Carter, listen." Isaiah didn't listen. His knee drove into Reynolds' stomach, cutting off whatever pathetic excuse was about to leave his mouth. The officer gasped, his body curling inward, spitting blood onto the pavement as he stumbled back. Isaiah didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He grabbed Reynolds by the collar, yanking him forward before slamming him face first onto the hood of the car. His cheek pressed against the cold metal, his breath ragged. "This what it felt like," Isaiah muttered, his voice low, seething, his grip tight against the back of Reynolds's neck. "When you threw Malcolm down? When you put your knee in his back?" He pressed down, forcing Reynolds against the car, grinding his face against the metal, his breath coming in sharp, broken bursts. "This what it felt like when you held him down and let Briggs put a bullet in him?" Reynolds struggled, his body twisting, his hands pushing back. But Isaiah barely felt it. You don't want to do this," Reynolds panted, his voice strained. "You put your hands on a cop, Carter, and you'll never walk free again." Isaiah yanked him back, spun him around, and drove his fist into his stomach. Reynolds choked, doubling over, a wet, gasping noise tearing from his throat. Isaiah grabbed him by the collar again, dragging him upright, forcing him to look at him. "You think I give a damn about walking free?" Isaiah's voice was a snarl now, his chest heaving, the weight of Malcolm's death, of every injustice, of every name erased by men like Reynolds and Briggs boiling over. Reynolds's eyes widened, a flicker of something real passing over his face now, understanding. This wasn't a grieving man throwing punches in anger. This was vengeance. And Isaiah wasn't done. Not even close. He slammed Reynolds against the car again, twisting his arm behind his back, his grip tightening against his wrist until the officer groaned in pain, his knees buckling beneath the force of it. Isaiah leaned in close, his breath hot against Reynolds's ear. "You ever hear a man beg for his life before?" he murmured. Reynolds's breath hitched. "Because I have," Isaiah continued. "I heard my brother plead. I heard him fight for every last breath after your partner put a bullet in him." Reynolds swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. Isaiah pulled him back, just slightly, just enough to let him get a breath before slamming him back down. "You think you know fear?" Isaiah's voice was ice now. Steady, deliberate. "You don't, but I'm gonna show you." And for the first time, Reynolds understood. This wasn't a warning, it was a promise. Isaiah pressed down harder, wrenching Reynolds's arm behind his back, forcing a choked groan from the officer's lips. "You feel that?" Isaiah muttered, his voice dangerously low, steady in a way that sent a cold, primal dread through Reynolds's veins. "That's the feeling my brother had in his last moments. The weight against his back, the helplessness, the realization that no matter what he said, no matter how much he pleaded, none of it was going to change a damn thing." Reynolds shook his head weakly, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "But please!" Isaiah's stomach twisted violently at the sound of that word coming from this man's lips, because Malcolm had begged. He had pleaded, and Reynolds had laughed. Isaiah leaned in closer, pressing his lips near Reynolds's ear. "That's the first time I've ever heard you say, 'please,'" he murmured, his voice almost thoughtful. "You think you deserve mercy?" Reynolds let out a garbled whimper, his body twitching under Isaiah's weight. Isaiah closed his eyes for just a fraction of a second, feeling the weight of Malcolm's absence pressing down on him, feeling the raw, unchecked rage that had been simmering inside him for days solidify into something lethal, something final. No more warnings, no more second chances. Reynolds had spent years preying on people, terrorizing black men who had done nothing but exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had stolen lives, stolen dignity, stolen futures. And now Isaiah was about to take something from him, permanently. Isaiah's grip shifted, his movements precise, calculated. Not just the wild force of revenge, not just unrestrained violence, but the trained precision of a man who had spent his entire career learning exactly how the human body worked, how it could be broken in ways that no surgery, no rehabilitation, no amount of money or connections could ever undo. His fingers found the right point at the base of Reynolds's neck, right between the cervical vertebrae. A single, perfect target. You ever hear what happens when you sever the right part of the spinal cord? Isaiah's voice was almost conversational. Calm, unshaken. Reynolds gasped, his body trembling now, his weight shifting as he tried to thrash free. Isaiah let him struggle. For a second, for one final moment of hope before taking it away forever. Then he struck. A quick, brutal jab. Precise. Unforgiving. There was a sharp, sickening pop. The kind of sound that wasn't loud but carried all the weight of something irreversible. Reynolds's entire body seized, his limbs locking for a split second before collapsing completely, his breath hitching, his mouth opening. But no sound came out. His throat spasmed uselessly, his hands twitching before going limp. Isaiah took a slow step back, watching as realization flooded into Reynolds's wide, horrified eyes. He tried to move his legs. Nothing. He tried to speak. Nothing. The panic came all at once, his breath hitching, his fingers scrabbling uselessly at the pavement as his body failed him, as his lungs stuttered through the first gasps of a man who truly understood, for the first time in his life, what it meant to be powerless. Isaiah crouched beside him, resting his elbows on his knees, his head tilting slightly. That feeling right there. His voice was quiet, almost eerily soft. That's the same feeling every single man you and Briggs put down felt in their last moments. That's the same fear Malcolm had. That's the same helplessness you let him die with. Reynolds's eyes burned with pure terror, his mouth still trying to form words, but nothing came. His spinal cord was severed too high. His vocal cords were gone. He would never speak again, never move again, never hurt anyone again. Isaiah exhaled, standing slowly. He let himself take in the moment, let himself watch Reynolds struggle, let himself feel the weight of what he had done settle into his bones before he turned away. His exit was clean, quiet, controlled. He moved through the alley, his footsteps blending into the night, his body slipping into the shadows like a man who had never been there at all. No cameras had caught him. No witnesses had seen. By the time Reynolds was found, by the time someone realized what had happened, Isaiah would be long gone. And by the time the officers at the precinct gathered around their fallen brother, whispering in hushed, horrified voices about the mysterious, permanent, irreversible injury that had left him a silent, broken shell of a man, Isaiah would already be planning the next move. Because this wasn't over. Not until Briggs felt the exact same thing. The city pulsed around Isaiah like a living thing, a quiet hum of life moving on, untouched by the war unfolding in the shadows. He moved with the night, a ghost between streetlights, unseen, unnoticed. This was the point of no return. He had known it the second he left Reynolds broken in that parking lot. He had felt it settle deep in his chest, in the slow, burning calm that had taken root inside him. There would be no redemption. No running, no hiding. The police would figure it out, and they did, faster than he expected. Isaiah had been careful, methodical. But the second Reynolds's condition was reported, the second the department realized this wasn't some random street attack, they had moved fast. The precinct had gone on high alert, and within hours, they had pieced it together. They knew it was him. And that was how Isaiah found himself watching his own house being raided from the shadows. He stood at a safe distance, tucked behind an old industrial building, his hoodie pulled low, his hands in his pockets, his breath slow and measured as red and blue lights flashed against the windows of the place he had once called home. Officers moved in and out, weapons drawn at first, then lowered as it became clear that he wasn't inside. They were too late. Isaiah had abandoned it the moment he knew what had to be done. He had left nothing behind but the furniture, the past, the ghost of the man he used to be. Still, he watched as they tore through it, as they searched, as they called out his name over radios. His name was no longer just a name. It was a target. He should have felt something. Panic, dread, regret. He felt nothing because this was inevitable, because he had work to do. Then his phone vibrated. He pulled it from his pocket, checked the screen. Ava. His stomach tightened instantly. Isaiah stepped deeper into the shadows before answering, keeping his voice steady. Yeah, but the second she spoke, he knew. Isaiah! He was here, his entire body locked. Ava, he said carefully, his voice dangerously low now. Tell me exactly what happened. Her breathing was uneven, tight, but controlled. He could tell she was pacing, could hear the slight shift of her heels against the hardwood. Briggs showed up at my house, barged in. He was panicking, Isaiah. He was out of his mind. Isaiah's vision blurred with heat. What did he say to you? His grip tightened around the phone. He's losing it, Ava continued, her voice strained, layered with something she rarely let slip. Fear. He said he knows it was you. He kept saying he could feel it, that you were out there watching, that you were coming for him. Good. Isaiah exhaled. Slow. Steady. And what else? She hesitated, just for a second. Then he put a gun to my head, Isaiah. The world stopped. Everything inside Isaiah went still. He said, if I don't tell him where you are, Ava continued, her voice quieter now, controlled but shaking just enough for him to hear it. He's going to kill me first, then come for you. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, ready to snap. Then Isaiah closed his eyes, and his voice came out calm, deadly. Where is he now? Ava swallowed. He left. I don't know where he is. Isaiah barely blinked. He knew Ava. Knew her well enough to hear the war waging inside her. You don't have to do this, she finally said, her voice steady but pleading. I already told you the police are on you. Your house is gone, Isaiah. It's a crime scene now. They're going to find any loose thread they can to pin you down. If you stop now, Ava, his voice cut through the air, sharp, unyielding. She went silent. Isaiah exhaled through his nose. You know I can't stop, and you know why. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, almost too softly. Yeah, I know. That was the thing. She did know. She knew exactly what this was, exactly what had to happen, even if she would never say it. Isaiah took another step back, watching the last of the officers move in and out of his house, watching the scene that no longer had anything to do with him. The man they were hunting was already gone. You need to leave your house, Isaiah told her, his voice firm now. An order, not a request. Now, pack a bag, go to a hotel. Pay in cash. Don't tell anyone where you are. Just stay out of this, Ava. You think running is going to… I'm not running, Isaiah interrupted, voice sharp, cutting. Briggs is… Silence. Then, be careful, she said. It was the closest thing to an admission he was ever going to get. And then, the line went dead. Isaiah slowly lowered the phone, his jaw clenching as he turned away from the raid, his feet carrying him toward his next destination. Briggs had made his move. He had made it personal. He had gone after Ava, which meant this ended now. Isaiah wasn't going to let him run. He wasn't going to let fear turn into desperation. No, Briggs was going to feel everything, and when it was over, Isaiah would make sure he never lifted a gun against anyone ever again. Isaiah moved through the night with singular focus, his breath steady, his hands tight around the wheel as he sped through the streets. Briggs wasn't just running. He was cornered, desperate, unraveling by the second. He had already stormed into Ava's house once, had already put a gun to her head, and Isaiah knew that if he didn't stop him now, he'd go back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, because men like Briggs didn't let go of control. They lashed out, tore things apart, dragged everyone down with them. If he felt like the walls were closing in, if he thought for a second that he had lost the last sliver of power he had left, he would try to take something with him. Isaiah wasn't going to let that happen. He had planned for this. Days ago, while studying Briggs, he had placed a tracker on his car. A small, untraceable device tucked into the wheel well, hidden under layers of grime, never noticeable unless you were looking for it. Isaiah had learned a long time ago that winning a fight wasn't about brute strength. It wasn't about rage. It was about preparation. And Isaiah had prepared for this exact moment. The screen in the passenger seat flickered, showing a blinking red dot weaving through the city. Briggs was moving erratically, cutting through back streets, doubling back, trying to shake an enemy he couldn't even see. Not fast enough. Isaiah tightened his grip, adjusting course, feeling the weight of inevitability settling over him. He wasn't just chasing Briggs, he was hunting him. The engine roared as he pushed the car faster, the distance closing, the streets thinning out as Briggs unknowingly led him into a stretch of road with no traffic, no streetlights, nothing but darkness and asphalt. Perfect. Isaiah's pulse was slow, measured, as he reached under the dashboard and cut off his headlights. His car melted into the night, the sound of his tires lost in the hum of the city behind him. Briggs wouldn't even see him coming. The red dot blinked. Isaiah could see the shape of Briggs's car now, just ahead, swerving slightly. A sign of a man trying to watch every angle at once, looking for threats in places where they weren't. Except this time, the threat wasn't behind him. It was coming from the side. Isaiah exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Then he jerked the wheel hard to the right. The impact was instant. The front of Isaiah's car slammed into Briggs's driver's side. Metal crunching, glass shattering, tires screaming as the officer's vehicle spun violently across the pavement. The momentum sent Briggs into a sharp skid, his car slamming into the guardrail, the force rattling through the frame. Isaiah barely felt the recoil. He had braced for it. Briggs hadn't. Isaiah was already moving before the cars had fully settled. His door flung open, boots hitting pavement as he closed the distance in seconds. Briggs was dazed, struggling against the seatbelt, his breath coming in short, stunned bursts as he tried to push himself upright. His gun was on the passenger seat, out of reach. Isaiah didn't give him time to recover. He ripped the driver's side door open, grabbed Briggs by the collar, and yanked him out of the wreckage. The officer hit the pavement hard, coughing, struggling, his hands grasping at nothing as he tried to orient himself. And then Isaiah saw it, the fear. Briggs's eyes were wide, wild, a man completely out of his depth, a man who had never felt powerless until now. Isaiah stepped forward, the weight of the night pressing in around them, his shadow stretching over Briggs's shaking form. The officer blinked up at him, dazed, his mouth opening like he wanted to speak, to reason, to say anything that might save him. Isaiah didn't let him. His fist slammed into Briggs's face, the impact snapping his head to the side. A sharp grunt tearing from his throat as his body recoiled against the asphalt. Briggs groaned, rolling onto his hands and knees, spitting blood onto the pavement. "Wait!" he gasped, his voice shaking. Isaiah's boot crashed into his ribs, sending him sprawling back onto his side, his breath hitching in a choked wheeze. "You weren't waiting when Malcolm was begging, were you?" Isaiah's voice was low, even, dangerous. Briggs coughed violently, one hand clutching his ribs, the other lifting weakly as if to ward off the next blow. I didn't have a choice," he panted. Isaiah's laugh was cold. "No," he said. "Now you don't have a choice." Briggs's breath came faster, panic leaking into every trembling limb, his body instinctively trying back to fight, but it was useless. Isaiah grabbed him by the collar again, dragging him to his knees, forcing him to look up. And in that moment, Briggs knew. This was it. There was no badge to protect him, no backup coming, no system to twist reality in his favor. Isaiah had him. And before this was over, Briggs would feel everything Malcolm had felt. The fight had just begun. Briggs coughed violently, his body trembling as he tried to push himself off the pavement, his breath wheezing from the impact of the last blow. Blood dripped from his split lip, pooling beneath him, staining the ground like a slow-moving reminder of everything he had done. of every life he had ruined under the protection of his badge. His hands clawed at the asphalt, his arms shaking with the effort of lifting his own weight. But Isaiah wasn't finished. Not yet. The second Briggs shifted. Isaiah's boot slammed into his ribs again, sending him rolling onto his back with a pained gasp. He was coughing blood now, the sound wet and broken. But Isaiah didn't care. "You like to throw people around, don't you?" Isaiah's voice was low, even, each word deliberate as he stepped closer, his shadow stretching over Briggs's battered form. "You like making people beg. You like watching them squirm, knowing they can't do a damn thing to stop you." His breathing was controlled, but his hands were clenched, his knuckles still warm with the officer's blood. "How does it feel now, Briggs?" He crouched low, grabbing the front of Briggs's shirt, forcing him to look up. "How does it feel, knowing there's nobody coming to save you?" Briggs let out a ragged breath, his eyes flickering with something Isaiah had never seen in them before. Real, honest fear. But then, even through the trembling, even through the blood leaking from his nose and the swelling already forming around his eye, the bastard smiled. "You think this changes anything?" he rasped, his voice hoarse but dripping with arrogance. "You think taking me down makes you a man? You're just another angry thug looking for a fight, just like your brother was." Isaiah saw red. His fist collided with Briggs's jaw, the impact sharp and brutal, sending the officer's head snapping to the side. He grunted, choking on his own blood. But Isaiah didn't stop. His hands locked onto Briggs's collar again, yanking him forward before slamming him back against the pavement. "Say his name," Isaiah growled. Briggs coughed, his body twitching in pain. "Say his name, you racist lowlife." Briggs let out a weak, bitter chuckle, his blood-stained teeth flashing through the swelling. "You're really gonna stand here and cry about your brother? That mouthy criminal had it coming. You know it. I know it. Your sister probably knows it too." His smirk twisted, even as his face twitched in agony. "Bet she's real proud of you now, huh? Watching you turn into exactly what they think we are." Isaiah didn't hesitate. His fist slammed down again, and again, and again. The rage that had been simmering, controlled, calculated, restrained for so long, finally snapped its chains. He let it take him. Briggs grunted with every impact, his body convulsing under the force of each hit, his blood splattering onto the pavement, onto Isaiah's knuckles, onto the ground like a slow rain. He tried to lift his arms, tried to shield his face, but Isaiah wasn't giving him an inch. "You don't get to talk about my sister," Isaiah snarled, his breath coming fast, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You don't get to talk about Malcolm. You don't get to say his name. You don't get to act like you know anything about the people you put in the ground." Briggs spat blood onto the ground, his breath rattling as he finally went completely limp, his head rolling to the side. His entire face was a swollen, mangled mess, his cheekbones fractured, his nose flattened, his lips torn open in places Isaiah hadn't even realized he had hit. His breaths were ragged, uneven, struggling. But still, he laughed. It was weak, broken, nothing more than a bubbling sound through bloody teeth, but the arrogance still lingered beneath it. "You think you win this?" Briggs wheezed, his voice slurred from the damage Isaiah had done to his face. "You think this is justice? This ain't justice. This is just you signing your own death warrant." His lips curled into something almost resembling a grin, despite the blood pouring down his chin. "You're gonna be running for the rest of your life, boy." Isaiah froze. That word, that one word, the same one Briggs had used when he had Malcolm on the ground, when he had been pinning him down, handcuffing him like he wasn't even human. The same word Isaiah had heard his whole life. The one that had always meant one thing: "You are beneath me." Briggs had never been afraid of him. Not really, because men like him never thought they could lose. Even now, beaten, bleeding, broken on the pavement, he still thought he was above Isaiah. Isaiah's jaw clenched, his breath steadying. He already knew what Briggs was saying was true. There was no going back. The police would be after him until they had him in cuffs, or until they put a bullet in his back. No matter how much they had protected Briggs, no matter how many crimes they had covered up for him, they would never let Isaiah get away with this. He had known it from the second Malcolm hit the ground. He had known it from the second he decided that justice wasn't enough. He wasn't leaving this night as a free man, but neither was Briggs. Isaiah let out a slow exhale, his mind clearing. The rage was still there, but it wasn't reckless anymore. It was something else now. Finality. Briggs lay sprawled across the pavement, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts, his body limp, broken, struggling against the weight of everything Isaiah had done to him. Blood painted his face, streaking down his swollen cheeks, pooling at the corners of his mouth, his teeth stained red with the price of his arrogance. His hands twitched weakly at his sides, his body trying to push back, to rise, to resist. But there was nothing left in him now. No power, no control, no smirk, no sneer, no easy lies to shield him. Just fear. Isaiah stood over him, fists still clenched, breath still slow, but the fire inside him had not burned out. Not yet. The rage was there, steady, waiting, whispering to him, telling him to finish it. It would be easy. One movement, one final strike. He could end it here, right now, and no one would mourn him. No one would fight to avenge him. No one would say his name the way they had cried out for Malcolm. The world would move on, unchanged, and for the first time in his life, Briggs would be nothing but a statistic. Isaiah took a slow breath, his fingers flexed. Briggs coughed, his swollen lips parting, his bloodshot eyes flickering with something desperate, something weak, but not entirely broken. He wanted to speak, wanted to say something, another plea, another lie, another final grasp at power. Isaiah didn't want to hear it, because he wasn't in that moment anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere darker, somewhere colder. He was on the pavement, kneeling beside his brother. Malcolm's hand had been trembling in his breath coming in wet, stuttering gasps, his body fighting for every last second. Isaiah could still feel the way his grip had tightened, weak but insistent, his eyes locking onto his own, desperate to keep him there, desperate to make sure that he heard him. Don't let them get away with it. Isaiah had sworn that he wouldn't. And that was why Briggs wasn't dying tonight, because death was too easy. Death was an escape, a release, a way to disappear into nothing and never have to live with the consequences. Briggs had never known suffering. He had never known what it was to feel powerless, to feel his body fail him, to feel fear coil around his ribs, to know that no one, not the law, not his fellow officers, not the system that had always shielded him, was coming to save him. Isaiah exhaled. The decision settled deep into his bones. Calm. Final. Briggs would never get to lift a gun again. Never get to press his knee into someone else's back. Never get to shove another man against a car. Never get to choke the breath from a person and call it justified. He would live, but like Reynolds before him, he would never walk again. Briggs must have seen it in his eyes, because for the first time his fear turned to panic. "Wait!" he croaked, his voice hoarse, thick with blood. "Please, don't!" Isaiah knelt, his grip tightening in Briggs's shirt, forcing his battered face to meet his gaze. "You were right about one thing," Isaiah murmured, his voice low, almost soft. But there was no kindness in it, only certainty. Only justice. "I will be hunted for the rest of my life." His breath was steady, even. "But so will you." Briggs's entire body tensed. Isaiah didn't hesitate. His hands moved with precision, the kind of brutal, practiced expertise only a soldier could have, the kind of skill that didn't just break a body, but left it trapped inside itself, conscious, aware, breathing, but useless. Briggs let out a sharp gasp as Isaiah's fingers pressed deep into the base of his spine, the exact spot where the nerves were most vulnerable. His body seized violently, his back arching for half a second, his muscles locking in place before everything went completely still. Isaiah let go. Briggs collapsed. His chest still rose and fell, his breath still came, but his legs did not move. His arms twitched once, a weak, feeble movement, before they too fell limp against the ground. Briggs's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Isaiah watched as realization flooded into the officer's face. The shock, the horror, the understanding. He tried desperately to lift his arms, to turn, to move his fingers, to do anything but lay there on the cold pavement, staring up at the sky like a man who had finally learned what it felt like to be helpless. But nothing happened. Isaiah's expression didn't change. "You ever hear a man beg for his life before?" His voice was quiet now, measured. "Because I have." Briggs let out a weak, broken sound, something between a sob and a gasp, something pathetic, something meaningless. Isaiah stood. Briggs didn't. Isaiah turned, his body slipping into the darkness, his movements unhurried, steady, knowing that Briggs would never stand again. Behind him, Briggs tried one last time to move. His fingers twitched. His chest shuddered. His lips parted, maybe to call for help, maybe to beg, maybe just to scream. Nothing. Isaiah didn't look back. Isaiah kept walking, his breath steady, his hands loose at his sides, his fate already sealed. The police would come for him, the system would hunt him, the weight of what he had done would never leave him. But Malcolm's voice echoed in his head, steady, certain, a reminder of why he had done this in the first place. Don't let them get away with it. And he hadn't. Briggs would never hurt anyone again. The city was alive with flashing lights, the distant wail of sirens splitting through the night, the police scrambling, hunting, trying to contain the chaos that Isaiah had unleashed. He stayed to the shadows, moving with precision, slipping through alleys, avoiding cameras, keeping his head low. The hunt was already underway. Briggs and Reynolds were both out of commission, paralyzed, useless, and every officer in the city would be out for blood. The force would not take this as a loss. They would take it as war. Isaiah had taken down two of their own, had left them broken and helpless, had made them feel something they had never felt before, powerless. And now, the weight of that humiliation would turn every badge into a target aimed at his back. He had expected it. What he hadn't expected was Ava being caught up in it. Briggs had made that decision for him when he had forced his way into her house, put a gun to her head, tried to use her as leverage. That was the one thing Isaiah had never wanted. Malcolm was already gone, buried under the weight of a system that had stolen his last breath and called it justice. Ava was the only thing left. And now, she was in the crossfire because of him. Isaiah clenched his jaw as he slipped into the back entrance of a quiet apartment building, moving swiftly through the stairwell, climbing 2 steps at a time, his breath steady despite the burn in his legs. The walls here were thin, the air stale with cigarette smoke and something old and forgotten, the dim glow of hallway lights barely cutting through the darkness. But it was safe, for now. He reached the door at the end of the hall, knocked once, a pause. Then the lock slid open. The door cracked just enough for him to see Ava's tired, knowing eyes staring back at him. She didn't speak. She just stepped aside, letting him in. Isaiah moved past her, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him as he stood in the small, quiet space. It was a temporary place, not her home. She had already abandoned that the second Briggs showed up at her door. A suitcase sat by the couch, half-zipped, papers stacked neatly beside it. Always prepared, always 10 steps ahead. He turned to face her, meeting her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ava didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't try to interrupt. She just crossed her arms, exhaled slowly, waiting for him to say what they both already knew. "This wasn't supposed to touch you," he continued, his voice low, steady, but heavy with something deeper. "I knew what I was doing. I knew what was going to happen to me. But I didn't want you to get dragged into it. I didn't want them looking at you the way they're looking at me now, Ava scoffed, shaking her head, a humorless, bitter sound slipping from her lips. You think this is the first time they've looked at me like that? She leaned against the counter, arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. You think because I wear a suit and argue in court instead of throwing punches in the street that they respect me? That they don't see me the same way they saw Malcolm? The same way they see you? Isaiah didn't answer, because she was right. She sighed, looking down at the floor for a moment before meeting his gaze again. You did what you had to do, and I can handle myself. He exhaled through his nose, glancing at the stack of legal documents on the table, at the unopened letters, at the weight of everything she was carrying because of him. Doesn't mean I don't regret it. Ava tilted her head, studying him carefully. Do you? Isaiah didn't answer right away. He thought about Briggs, about Reynolds, about the terror in their eyes when they finally understood, when they finally felt the fear they had inflicted on others. He thought about Malcolm's last words, about the promise he had made, about the way justice had failed them at every turn. No, he said finally, his voice firm, steady. I don't. Ava held his gaze for a long moment before nodding, her expression softening just enough to let him know that she understood. Isaiah sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw, knowing what had to come next. I have to go. The words felt final because they were. Ava nodded again, her eyes flickering with something unreadable, something unspoken, something neither of them had the time to say out loud. Where? He shook his head. Doesn't matter. She exhaled through her nose, looking away for a brief moment before stepping forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. They're never going to stop looking for you. Isaiah nodded. I know. They're going to spin this however they want. Make you the monster. Make you public enemy number one. I know. Ava's fingers curled slightly against the fabric of his jacket, her voice dropping lower, more serious. Isaiah, if you ever need... He shook his head before she could finish. I don't want you waiting for a call that isn't coming. He forced himself to hold her gaze, to let her see the truth in his eyes. I need you to be okay. You're the only thing left, Ava. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Then go. Isaiah inhaled slowly, taking in the moment, the last piece of home he had left. He stepped back, gave her one last look, and then he turned, disappearing through the door without another word. He didn't look back. He couldn't. By the time the police realized where he had been, he would be long gone. A ghost in the wind. Another name on their list. Another problem to hunt down and bury. But they would never find him. Because Isaiah wasn't running. He was already gone. Time moved differently now. There were no weeks, no months. Just the passage of days. The cycle of sunrises and sunsets that blurred together as Isaiah kept moving, staying ahead of the hunt, staying invisible in a world that was always watching. The moment he had walked out of Ava's apartment, the moment he had disappeared into the wind, he had known there was no returning to anything that had come before. He was a ghost now. The police had come down hard, harder than he had even expected. The media storm had erupted overnight, headlines screaming about an ex-Delta Force operative turned cop killer, about a vigilante with military training who had assaulted and crippled 2 decorated officers in what they framed as an act of calculated terrorism. They didn't mention Malcolm. They didn't mention why it had happened. They twisted it, controlled the narrative, turned it into something bigger than Isaiah himself, something dangerous, something monstrous, something that justified every resource they threw into hunting him down. But Isaiah had planned for this. He had been trained for this. And unlike them, he had no rules to follow. He moved through cities like a shadow, slipping in and out of places before his name could ever come up, before his face could ever linger too long in someone's mind. The first thing he had done was strip himself of everything that tied him to the life before. No phone, no bank accounts, nothing traceable. The military had taught him how to disappear, but that had always been under controlled conditions, with a mission structure, with an extraction plan waiting at the end. This time, there was no end. This was forever. The new identity had been easy enough. There were people who specialized in making men like him disappear, in selling clean paperwork, in setting up new names, new lives. His money had gone far, cash only, nothing electronic, nothing that could leave a trail. The man he had been was dead. A new one had taken his place, somewhere quiet, somewhere where no one looked too hard at a stranger who kept to himself. A small town tucked deep into the hills, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions as long as you kept your head down, where the roads were long and empty, where the days passed without urgency. It wasn't home. It never could be, but it was enough. He worked under the table, jobs that paid in cash, things that let him stay in the background, construction, repairs, anything that let him use his hands, keep his mind occupied, keep himself steady in a life that wasn't real but was necessary. The people in town knew him just enough to nod in passing, but not enough to ask where he came from. He was nobody here, and that was exactly what he needed to be. But the past never really left him, and sometimes the radio would catch his attention. The flicker of a news segment reminding the world that the manhunt was still alive, that the police were still looking, that there were still whispers of him being seen in places he had never been, false leads, ghost sightings. But they were still searching, and they always would be. Then, one night, sitting in a quiet bar on the outskirts of town, he heard her name, Ava Carter. His chest tightened, but he didn't react, didn't move, didn't even look up from his drink as the news anchor's voice filtered through the static-laced audio, detailing the official findings of the department's internal investigation. Briggs and Reynolds had been painted as fallen officers, victims of a violent ambush. But the department had been forced to acknowledge the deeper rot beneath it all. Briggs's misconduct had been exposed. Reynolds's record had been picked apart. The people they had brutalized, the cases that had been swept under the rug. It had all come to light. Too late for justice, too late to mean anything for Malcolm, but enough to send a shock through the department. Enough to make them retreat just a little. Enough to make them let Ava go. Her legal battles had been long, but she had survived. No charges, no threats of disbarment. She had been questioned, harassed, followed, but in the end, they had nothing on her, because she hadn't done anything. She had just been his sister, and that wasn't a crime. The news report moved on, shifting to another headline, and Isaiah finally let himself breathe. She was safe. She was free. That was all he had wanted. He finished his drink, left a few bills on the counter, and walked out into the night, his breath curling in the cold air as he made his way back toward his rented room on the edge of town. His life had become quiet now, his days bleeding into one another, time moving in ways that didn't feel real. But that was the price of disappearing, the only price that mattered, because Malcolm had asked him for one thing before he died. Don't let them get away with it, and they hadn't. Reynolds and Briggs would never hurt anyone again. And Isaiah Carter? Isaiah Carter was just a ghost now, another name lost to the world. And that was how it had to be. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that stretched endlessly, muted and heavy. The clouds thick with the weight of something that never quite became rain. The cemetery was quiet, tucked away on the outskirts of the city, far enough from the noise, from the world that had kept moving, from the people who had forgotten what was buried here. But Isaiah hadn't forgotten. He stood at the edge of the path, his hands in his pockets, his breath slow and measured, his heartbeat steady despite the way his chest felt tight, despite the way his feet felt heavier the closer he got. 1 year. It had been 1 year since he had last seen Malcolm's face, 1 year since he had felt his brother's hand gripping his own, 1 year since that last breath, those last words, that final promise that had set everything in motion. Don't let them get away with it. He hadn't, but it had cost him everything. He took the last few steps, the wind cold against his skin, his jaw tight as his eyes fell on the headstone. Malcolm Carter, beloved son, devoted brother, taken too soon. Isaiah swallowed hard, his throat burning, the pressure building in his chest until it cracked. until his knees hit the ground, until his hands pressed against the earth, like he was trying to pull Malcolm back from the other side. The grief hit him in waves, slow at first, then sharp, then crushing, the kind of pain that didn't fade, that only learned how to settle deeper. His shoulders shook, his breath hitched, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself break. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw, the weight of the past year pressing down on him all at once. "I tried, Malcolm. I did everything I could. I made them pay. I made sure they'd never touch anyone again. I did what you asked me to do." He exhaled sharply, his fingers digging into the dirt. "But I still lost you." A sob broke free, his head bowing forward, his body curling slightly as the grief consumed him, as the memories rushed back too fast, too strong, too much. The laughter, the late-night conversations, the way Malcolm had always looked out for him, always been the one to keep them steady. His brother had always been the calm one, the one who thought before he acted, the one who never let the anger take him the way Isaiah had. And now, he was gone. Isaiah wiped at his face, his breath still uneven, his heart aching. "I wish you were here," he whispered. "I wish I didn't have to do any of it. I wish they hadn't taken you from me." His fingers traced the edge of the stone, his voice breaking. "But I wouldn't change it. Not one damn thing." A familiar warmth settled beside him, a quiet presence, a steady hand resting gently on his back. He didn't flinch. He didn't have to look to know who it was. Ava knelt beside him, silent at first, her touch firm but comforting, her fingers pressing gently against his shoulder. She didn't say anything, didn't rush him, didn't try to pull him back from the grief. She just let him feel it. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, steadying himself. "You found me," he murmured. Ava let out a quiet, breathy chuckle, but there was no humor in it, only understanding. "You think I wouldn't?" Isaiah sniffed, shaking his head slightly. "Didn't know if I'd ever see you again." Ava's grip on his shoulder tightened for a moment before she finally spoke. "You needed time," she said simply, "and I knew where to find you when you were ready." Isaiah swallowed, nodding, his fingers still pressed into the earth, still trying to ground himself in something real. He turned slightly, finally looking at her. She looked good, stronger, tired, maybe, but steady in a way that told him she had made it through the storm. He let out a slow breath. "Are you happy?" Ava tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "Happiness is complicated," she admitted, "but I'm okay." "That's enough for now," Isaiah nodded, staring at Malcolm's name carved into the stone. "That's all I wanted." Ava shifted closer, her voice softer now. "And what about you?" Isaiah let the question settle, let himself feel the weight of it. He had spent the past year running, rebuilding, disappearing. He had no home, no future, no real past anymore. Just a life that kept moving. Just another name, another face that didn't exist in any system. But he was alive, and so was she. He turned back to her, his expression calmer now. "I'll be okay." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face, then nodded. "I know." He exhaled, the tension easing just slightly, and then, for the first time in a year, he pulled her into an embrace. Ava let out a quiet breath against his shoulder, her arms tightening around him, her grip solid, real, grounding. The weight of everything they had lost and everything they had survived lingered between them, but they were still here, together. When they finally pulled back, Isaiah let out a small, almost reluctant chuckle. "I know I can't stay." Ava nodded, her gaze unwavering. "But you can always find me." A small smile flickered at the corner of his lips. "And you can always find me." Ava smirked, shaking her head slightly. "That part's a little harder. You are pretty damn good at disappearing." Isaiah exhaled, glancing at the grave once more before finally pushing himself to his feet. Ava followed, brushing dirt from her hands, her expression unreadable but warm. There were no goodbyes. Not this time. He reached out, gave her hand one last squeeze, and then turned, walking away, slipping into the distance once more. Ava watched him go, her arms crossing over her chest, her eyes steady, knowing he would never be too far. He had disappeared once, but now he knew where to find his way back. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.